Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
John, I have been talking about you on this podcast for about 9 months now. I think people are tired of hearing me reference you, so it is a distinct honor to have you here one-on-one to tap your wisdom for the next hour, my friend.
Right on. Thank you, Dominic. I'm glad to be here.
Well, I thought that we would dive right into the conversation, John, and maybe hitting something pretty sensitive right off the bat. Why is it that Clayton Kershaw can't seem to win the big one?
Fuck. I think it's just in his head. Now, I mean, let's take out the Houston Astros cheating in 2017. He was up by 5 runs in that game. But other than that, I just think it's in his head, man. It crushes me every year because the guy really wants it. He works his ass off, but it's one of the heartbreaks of my life.
Yeah, it's fascinating in this world of spirituality and personal development. It's the deeper I go, the harder it is for me to find someone who's a sports fan. So when I found out that you were a rabid Dodgers fan, I knew I had to question you on this one. And I also think it'd be kind of fascinating because here is a man, Clayton Kershaw, who's one of the best of our generation, 3 Cy Youngs. He won an MVP, which is rare for a pitcher. But then in the postseason, his stats are entirely different. He's lost more than he's won. And I was curious for you as someone who works so deeply with men, what do you see?
Yeah, I think he becomes more, 2 things. One's a baseball answer, which is I think he gets overused in the regular season. And then in the postseason, especially winning 7 in a row and going deep into the postseason year after year after year, I think he's tired because he doesn't have as much sharpness if you're a baseball fan. His slider's not as sharp, right? And so that's what Rendon hit, was a slider that didn't slide. So I think part of it is just he's overused. And I think the other part of it is that it's now in his head and he's kind of bought into a story that he's going to fail. And even though you would like to think that a professional and a sharp-minded, very talented man like that, I mean, we know lots of them, this is his kryptonite. And he's kind of bought into the kryptonite and he hasn't found a way to kind of perform through it. I mean, that's my best guess.
If he came to you and that was the actual story that he's bought into, that I'm a different pitcher in the postseason, how would you work with him on that?
That's a great question. Well, I'd see first, I'd try to find out if there's that belief swimming around, right? Because, he says all the right things, but I lots of guys will say all the right things, but I'd actually try to see if that belief is in there. And if it's kind of swimming in the dark recesses of his mind, and if there's some unprocessed emotional energy around it, because I'm sure there would be, right? I mean, I'm sure there's some kind of frustration. And then I'd work with that and actually try to liberate whatever has not been fully felt and use it as fuel because, let's face it, emotions are just energy, right? They're just energy. And thermodynamic physics tells us that we can't get rid of energy. We can only transmute it. We can use it elsewhere, but we can't push a button and make it disappear. We can liberate it, right? So I would find the energy that's still in there and I would see if we could transmute it into sort of a fierceness or determination or a sharpness that would, get him over the hump. I hope you're sending this to the Dodgers front office.
I was going to say we're planting the cosmic seeds of next season. John Wineland working with Clayton Kershaw finally gets over the hump. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
That would be the pinnacle of my professional career.
Most men's pinnacles. Yeah.
Right.
So John, before we started recording, we were talking about the proliferation that you've seen in men's work over these last few years. And you were someone who started, I would say, before the masses and long before. And I'm curious as to was there a coming of age moment or a series of moments that led you on that path to make this your life's work?
Well, there was a few. I spent most of my 20s kind of in a daze of, I drank a lot and partied a lot and was pretty much a regular dude. Got a graduate degree. So I did hide my, lifestyle in graduate school. went to college, tried to be successful. And when I got sober around, when I was in my late 20s, it started to become clear to me that I didn't know what to do with my own pain. And I didn't know what to do in relationship. And so one of the first experiences I had was right when my daughter was born. I was living in Austin, Texas. I was working I was on a fellowship at UT. And I found this men's group that was led by a therapist, but it was it was one of those old school emotional clearing men's groups where 6 of us would go out into a cabin in the woods in Austin with plastic bats and pillows. And we would express the unexpressed rage and anger and disappointment and heartbreak of our lives and be witnessed by these other men who were just holding space and loving on you. Just that experience of being able to feel the pain of my own father's absence or my own mother's problems or, my daughter's illness. My daughter was very sick when she was born and just life, man, that was such a fucking game changer for me to receive that kind of masculine love. Like, here's the ugliest, most broken part of me. Mm-hmm. And I'm defenseless against what you guys think about me. And all that I was met with was love by those men. Mm. And so that was the first real kind of moment where I was like, fuck, I've been looking for this my whole life, right? I've been wanting this my whole life. And then later, I don't know, it was a few years later, 6, 7 years later, then most of my sobriety has been spent in men's groups. I've been a men's meeting every day, pretty much at lunch.
Okay.
For the first 15 years of my sobriety. But that's kind of a different sort of men's work. But basically what I learned was that I could trust men, that the more I brought the truth of my heart and the more I brought a purity of heart and a sincerity and a desire to be deeper, the more men came towards me, and they came towards me with respect and with love. And it was a really great lesson. And this happened over the course of years. And then finally, when I was introduced to David Deida's work in 2008, I showed up at one of his workshops and had a similar experience that I had had in the woods, 8 years earlier, something like that, 10 years earlier. And so, yeah, man, it just hit me like, wow, this work, one of the things that's been missing from men of our generation, I'm a little older than you, but my generation, your generation, and even the newer generation, is that there hasn't been a way for men to connect in depth and love and, to really be there for each other. And when I found this in David's work, it truly, like, immediately I was hooked. I was like, all right, fuck this. I'm going to go everywhere this guy goes. I'm going to do as much men's practice as I can. I started really doing a lot of men's work, started my own Embodied men's group, and I just dove in.
Yeah.
Not knowing I would teach, but just more like, I know that this is what is needed for my life so that I can actually succeed and be a happy human being.
What you just said about being able to trust men for the first time. Many men, and myself included, I found myself in groups of men my whole life. I played sports all throughout growing up. That was my identity. I became a fraternity guy in college. I was a sales guy when I was in professional corporate services, surrounded by guys. I was never without men, ever, and without male relationships, ever. But I didn't know how little I trusted men or felt safe around men. Like, I never would have even known to use that language. So I'm just curious for you, John, how would a man like me, the former version of me, how would you turn me on to this concept of, like, just even being aware of the fact that I'd been hiding, not feeling safe, not trusting men?
Well, I would never want to impose that on somebody before they're ready. I think I was ready at the time. Like I said, my daughter was born very sick. And so I had this kind of desperate pain, thank God, to, figure out how to navigate raising a daughter with special needs and, being successful, making enough money to pay for her care and a life together, all of those things. So, I was desperate. and, desperation and willingness, ultimately men need to find what they're desperate for and what they're willing to do. And my job is to help them find what they're desperate for. Most of them think they're desperate for success, but really what they're desperate for is freedom and depth. And if I can show them that there's a freedom and depth that is irregardless of whether they're crushing it at work or how much they're getting laid, right? That there's a depth and a freedom within them that then makes them not only a better lover, but more attractive financially. Mm-hmm. That works pretty well. Most guys that actually give it a shot find that works pretty well. I mean, including, you're a good example of this, right? I'm imagining you had some experience of this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And part of my journey was 4 years in Sex Addicts Anonymous, and the freedom that I experienced from being driven around by my own compulsions, right? Having a choice, the freedom of being able to connect with my sexual desires and opening myself up. I was able to go deeper where I was just bouncing around on surface level contact. Mm-hmm. And your work has been instrumental in that. So I have to thank you for that. You know, as we're talking about that desperation and the willingness, right? And now there's more availability with men's work everywhere, right? Books and podcasts, men are writing them, women are writing them. How would you help a man who's at the very beginning of his journey where he's now desperate enough and willing enough? Right. How does he figure out which path to go down?
Right. Well, I like the idea. I mean, first of all, it's great that there's so many groups coming up. Like there's a lot of, and Instagram culture and Facebook culture is sort of perpetuated at least the facade of depth. But I would check with, if some guy was coming to me and say, how do I choose, right? I would say, pick somebody who has been doing this for a long time, right? Not somebody who just started a podcast, right? Or somebody who's actually deep in doing this. And I would find out what they're like, who they learn from and what's the experience that they have. And, I would really investigate this, because you're stepping into an environment where you're going to be opened up. And if it's not clean, and if it's not well held, I mean, you hear me talk all year about tight container, you know what I mean? Like if it's not well held and if it's not deep, then it can be very damaging. Yeah. It can be very damaging. So I would tell men to like, for example, Mankind Project is something that I did for a few years, and they have a long history of, started with, Bill Kauth and Robert Bly and Sam Keen, and those guys all wrote books and were part of the original men's circles, right? This was their purpose. So you can imagine like stepping into Mankind Project or something like that. You're stepping into a deep lineage. David's work, same thing. Like David's has been in men's groups for 30 years, teaching, wrote books on it, still is in men's groups. I come out of that. And so, find not that those are the only two, but those are the two that I could think of. There's other guys that have deep experience and have taught people. And so I would just make sure that there's some roots in whatever men's program you're going to, because it's easy to get caught up in sort of flashiness and in the desperation to connect with other men. Yeah. And you can actually overlook the fact that people who are teaching you have very shallow roots.
I think about the answer you just gave, and it's exactly the process I followed for finding you. Yeah, I mean, so at the end of 2018, it was December, and I said, 2019 is going to be the year that I deepen my practice around intimacy. And I started asking around. I said, who is the guy that I need to learn from? And I got some stuff back that when I did the research, it felt like there weren't roots. There wasn't a lineage. And then your name came up about 5 or 6 different times, including from Jason Gaddis, who's a mutual friend of ours, who I trust. And when I found out that your lineage was David Deida, and his book was one that changed my life over 10 years ago, it was one of the seminal turning points of my life, I was like, okay, this feels right. And I have not been steered wrong. So that's wonderful, wonderful guidance, John. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we hear a lot now about how there's a new call for masculine leadership, a different kind of masculine leadership, whether it's in relationship or in business. And everyone seems to agree that we need something new, but no one seems to be able to say exactly what that is.
Yeah.
You got any answers for us?
Yeah. I mean, I've been saying this for a while. Maybe you've heard me say it, but in my men's, I have a 9-month men's program that I run every year. The whole thing is on masculine leadership. And, it's a little more nuanced than what I'm going to say, but for the sake of time, the masculine, right, in ancient teachings, like all the way back to ancient Hindu teachings, basically from the dawn of time, men have been trying to find the part of them that is deep and unchanging, right? Women too, right? But the framework that David came up with, and actually he he didn't come up with it, but he really articulated it in a way that I think is super profound, which is that the part of us that is deep and unchanging and infinite, the never changing essence of us, that was us before we had a name, right? That us, well, you can feel that, right? Like we all kind of have a sense of that. That us is our essential masculine in a man, in a woman, however you identify gender-wise, like every human being has that. If you're masculine identified, then you're identified more with that, more with the part of you that's unchanging. You feel at home there. You feel at home in peace. You feel at home in less, right? Not that you don't want more here or there, more money, more sex, but you feel at home in nothingness, or so to speak, or closer to home. So masculine leadership then is our capacity to connect to consciousness, to the unchanging nature of our own existence, and then decide what needs to happen from there. Most of us decide what needs to happen from our thought processes, from our programming, from our egos, from our minds, right? Or better, men's work in the last 20 years has been about connecting to your heart, 30 years, 40 years maybe, really connecting into your heart and then letting the wisdom of your heart lead you. And that's great too, right? But there's really consciousness, the exploration and the dive into consciousness, and then to make the decisions of your relationship, of your company, of your life, of the direction of your purpose, all of those things from there. That is the essence of masculine leadership. Does that make sense? I know it's kind of esoteric, but I want to make sure you can clarify if you think your listeners need some more.
Yeah, I mean, let's dive into some of the things that I've learned from you over this past year. So one of the key teachings that you have shared is that almost every complaint that comes from the feminine is typically associated with a lack of, and by the way, correct me if I'm getting this language wrong.
Yeah, sure.
Not feeling seen, heard, felt, or understood. And that's due to some form of lapse in consciousness from the masculine. Right. And so what are some of those, maybe some like real practical examples of ways that you see a man lapsing in consciousness?
Yeah, well, the typical way that most men lapse in consciousness is they take their attention, they take their awareness, and they put it on their thoughts. We do it all day long.
Yeah.
Right? Not just men, women do it too, but men are fucking, legendary at this. And will just be, the quintessential man in his head. Like, I'm taking my awareness. So consciousness, the practical application of consciousness is awareness, right? So consciousness just is. Like, consciousness is the essence of all life, humanity, maybe even the universe, depending on what you believe. Well, awareness is the arm of consciousness, is the vision of consciousness. So I'm aware that you and I are having this conversation, right? There's a part of me that's aware we're conversing, right? My capacity to stay tethered to that deeper awareness and continue to feel the flow of the conversation, the nature of the conversation, and answer your questions and maybe lead things in a different way and all those things, that is my capacity as a leader, right? To stay connected to that. So the way that most men lapse in consciousness is they take that awareness that could be placed on the infinite, could be placed on depth, could be placed on love, could be placed, the ocean. I got the ocean out there. I could place my awareness on the ocean or the trees or other human beings or anything except my fucking thoughts, which are basically about me most of the time, getting what I want. How do I get what I want? How do I get more of what I want? And so the way that what the feminine is so great at is pointing out how we drift into that habitual thinking. And it causes tension in them. And that tension tends to manifest as mistrust and complaint. Yeah. So big piece of masculine practice is learning to take our focus from our thoughts and put it on something deeper, either our own bodies, our own hearts, our own breath, the earth. You know what I mean? Like the list is, there's hundreds of things we could be putting our awareness on. So does that help clarify that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's an example in the news from a few months ago where the CEO of Fisher Investments, I forget if his name is Mark Fisher or Ken Fisher's, he's Fisher. And there was $112 billion investment organization that he ran. And he was speaking to a group of 200 CEOs, men and women in the room. And he used an example of trying to close a new investment business is like going to a bar and getting into a girl's pants. And so I'm picturing this room and this, I don't know if I would even call that a lapse of consciousness, more like a lack of consciousness.
Right.
Because it is an example he's given like over the years. And he ended up causing an uproar of $4 billion left his firm. It wasn't a death knell to his firm, but certainly millions of impact. Yeah. And it's the lack of awareness of the divisiveness, the old boys club behavior. And so what you're talking about, and I see you do this all the time, having sat in rooms with you where there are men, there are women, there is trauma, there's someone sprawled out crying in front of you, there's a partner who's being attacked, like, the boyfriend or the girlfriend being attacked, and you're holding all of that, making sure that we are all there and all safe. And it requires a hell of a lot of work to get there. And to that point, John, the word that you've used over and over again is practice. Since I've started studying from you, you place such an emphasis on practice to refine consciousness, the depth and the breadth of our awareness. So I would love to know, like in your own words, how would you define a practice and why is it so important to a man's ability to raise his consciousness?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I'll stick with masculine practice, right? Rather than, co-ed practice. But for those who are masculine identified, think of consciousness and awareness like muscles. Well, consciousness just is. Like, you don't have to do shit to remember, like, oh, I'm consciousness. You just have to remember it. But awareness and where you place that awareness and how deep and wide that awareness goes. And I mean, you've done practice with me where I'm saying, feel the cosmos, right? Or feel the ocean, or feel the trees outside the room, or feel all the other human beings. Well, that is a muscle. Right, that is a muscle. It's not too unusual. I mean, it's the muscle that ninja developed, right? Mm-hmm. To feel what's behind them, or a great basketball player, right? That's an example David uses, right? To feel where a no-look pass is basically his consciousness, Magic Johnson's consciousness, is aware enough, he's played that muscle enough that he can actually feel James Worthy to his right behind him. Well, you or I probably wouldn't have that strength of consciousness, or that strength of awareness. So what practice does is it develops our capacity to expand our awareness while oftentimes being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because when we become uncomfortable, like, for example, during sex, right? Like when you're in sex for a long period of time, it's not that you're uncomfortable, but you're exerted. Let's put it that way, if it's longer than a 5-minute experience. Well, to be able to, or you're in an argument with a partner or in a very difficult situation professionally, when we get uncomfortable, our consciousness tends to shrink to our own thoughts or ourself, right? We literally go, let's like a shrink wrap. And so to be able to train your muscles to open and feel out, especially when you're uncomfortable, that is the essence of good masculine practice. And going back to your men's work example or question, most men's practice, they miss that one. It's all about like, how do you get more in touch with your emotions and how do you own your emotions? And there's beauty in that. There's real beauty and need in that. But that's not the same thing as true masculine practice.
Right on. And that's you in your workshops really test that. So for example, I remember one of the biggest turning points in the first workshop I came to with you. This was in February of last year. It was a 4-day workshop. And my job as a masculine practitioner was to hold space for the feminine practitioner. So this was a woman that I was paired up with, or multiple women over the course of the few days I was partnered with that I didn't know before coming into the workshop. And they were expressing whatever the truth of their heart was in that particular moment, right? It could be tears, it could be screaming, it could be anger, it could be sensuality. And my role was to stand there and to just and hold and to breathe into my belly. But I found that many of the women that I was partnered up with, and I'm going to try and say this as compassionately as I can while still maintaining the truth, which is I was not physically attracted to, and in some cases repelled by. And that was in my space of being able to actually be there for them and hold it. I was uncomfortable, and I found myself in my mind wanting to disappear. And I remember on the third morning, you brought us into a room where it was just the men. And you said, does anyone have any questions? And my hand shot up in the air and I shared this exact story with you. And I said, John, I know I'm missing something. And I'm like, please tell me what it is. And I remember you went on to tell a story of your one of your first practices that forever changed the way that I viewed discomfort in that environment. Would you be willing to share that here?
Yeah, it's one of the first. Well, let me just speak to put a little context in, right? So we were talking about awareness.
Okay.
And part of what happens when man or woman, we'll talk to men about this, when our attention is on the surface of a human being, be it another man or another woman, basically we're saying my awareness is on her physical beauty or her lack thereof, in my opinion, or it's on her physicality. So we're taking our awareness and we're putting it on the surface of her, right? Which is natural, but it's not the deepest play. There's the depth of her heart, and then there's the depth of love that's eternal and infinite. And all of these things are moving through a feminine practitioner. And I know you experience that later. So it's just important to set that context up.
Absolutely.
Again, it's in this question of awareness and where we're putting it. So for me, what I learned was I was paired with a woman who was, literally like in a wheelchair. And she, for lack of a better term, I don't know if there's a politically correct way to say midget. She was a midget. Mm. And I thought to myself, fuck, how am I going to practice in this? This is not somebody I would consider beautiful. And how am I going to do this? And we went into a long 45-minute practice where we first started to breathe together and then to look into each other's eyes. And I was standing over her. She was sitting in a chair. And as the practice went on and David led us into these deeper, led me from the surface of her into her heart.
Yeah.
Right. And then beyond her heart into the infinite beauty of life itself, she became incredibly beautiful. And there was this beautiful spark and energy between us. And that was the moment I got hooked. I thought, fuck, if this kind of experience can happen with somebody I have no physical attraction to, what could happen to somebody that I'm madly in love with?
Wow.
And that was the moment I got hooked into this work.
When you opened that door for me, from my own understanding of where my attention was, which for my whole life to some degree, right, has been attuned to that because I hadn't been trained otherwise. And there were moments, of course, many moments over the course of my life where I shared intimacy that went beyond that. But most of my awareness was on the surface of what does the person look like, smell like, what's happening here. Mm-hmm. And I remember you asking the men in the room when I posed that question, you turned to the men in the room and said, how many of you men here are with your partners? And I don't know, 75% of the room raised their hand. And you said, you asked them the question of how many of you have had that experience of being with your partner and also that person not wanting to be with them at all in a particular moment, just wanting to be with any other person besides them. And every single man to a person raised their hands. And you said, just so you all know, your feminine partners have felt the same way about you at a particular point in time. And he said, and the reason why we do this practice is because if we want to have these long-term relationships of intimacy and depth, then we have to be able to attune our attention, our awareness beyond the surface. And as soon as you taught me that, the rest of that workshop and the 9-month salon that I was a part of that followed, I found myself in such deep practice with women that on the surface were just not my type, where I went to depths and I found arousal. I felt closeness. I felt her infinite beauty that I never thought would have been possible. So yes, to everything that you've shared so far.
It's liberating, right? I mean, it's liberating. And not only that, but to me, I mean, I'm so glad you shared that and you had that experience because not all men do. You worked hard at it and you really went for it. But it's so liberating to be able to see beyond the surface. We're so trapped by our surface level, either in long-term relationships or dating world, where there's such a deeper possibility that practice, going back to your question about practice, helps us unlock.
Yeah.
So that's why practice is so important, because we would just never see it, nor would we have the nervous system capacity or the strength of internal musculature to be able to practice with it if we don't first spend time.
Yeah. When you talk about building that internal musculature and the practice, the thing that my mind keeps going to is the depths of practice that you went through after the loss of your daughter. I believe it was in September of 2018. Is that correct, John?
Yeah, that's right.
To cystic fibrosis. And I remember this year, back in 2019, we hosted you at an event here in New York City. It was on Father's Day. It was your first Father's Day that you'd spent without Claire. I've listened to some of your sharing of the stories of you going into deep grief, like allowing yourself to feel that fully. And I I think it would be really helpful to share, if you feel comfortable, the practice that you went through to actually feel those feelings and to grieve so that you could hit the depths of that, so that you could process what you went through.
Well, yeah, I'll share in broad strokes. One of the practices that I've learned from my teachers, and it's actually a sexual practice. It's part of a sexual intimacy, spiritual intimacy practice. So you can imagine having sex, right? Taking your awareness, feeling your body, feeling your partner's body, his or her body, their body, having sex, feeling, so you're feeling these two bodies having sex, right? And your capacity to feel both is just very deep and fine-tuned. So feeling deeply the experience of sexuality. Once you practice enough, you can feel that, but also feel consciousness. God, some people might say God, some people might say, consciousness of the universe, the spirit of the universe, but there's something that is feeling you, feeling the experience, right? So we're practicing feeling the experience fully, and then also practicing feeling the infinite, feeling us, feeling the experience. I know it sounds a little complicated, but it's a meditative practice, just like it's a meditative and yogic practice. Well, apply that to grief or any, I can feel the grief. I can surrender my own feminine, my own heart to the grief. And I can also feel God, for lack of a better term. I mean, you don't have to call whatever you call God, holding me, feeling the grief. And that container of consciousness holding me while I'm feeling deeply allows me to feel deeper and also to feel held. And I don't know if I taught that to you guys in the salon, but that's generally what I teach, how I teach people to deal with grief. And also it's a great sexual practice too.
That's beautiful, John. And one of the things I know that you've said is that when we actually go deep enough to touch the emotion that's really there and to feel that emotion fully, what's often there on the other side of it is joy. Is feeling the feeling fully is joy. And that almost seems counterintuitive, especially as you're talking about something like losing a 21-year-old daughter, your one child. And how does that work, is to feel something so fully where joy comes out on the other side of it?
Yeah. It's one of those inexplicable mysteries of life, right? Of humanity, of our human experience and of our hearts, right? I mean, to go into, again, I said at the beginning that, physics teaches us that energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be moved or transmuted or taken into a different direction. And so the energy of grief can be felt so deeply and transmuted that it becomes this deep appreciation with Claire for the time I had with her and for her as a human being and for just like how much my heart loves. And so all of that, it's a practice that, I don't think I would have been able to do 5 years ago, right? Or 3 years ago even. It's cumulative. I've been doing this now for, over 11 years. And so it's one of those things that is a cumulative experience to be able to go deeper and deeper and deeper into my heart. And almost always on the other side of that, it might not be, excitement, like if you've been to Tony Robbins event, like jumping up and down kind of joy, but there's a deep satisfaction and kind of a richness, a rich joy or a rich appreciation for life and all that we get to experience.
As you've transcended that pain and that grief and you're on the other side of that and there's a new relationship with that energy, you probably have really refined your senses of being able to look at the men that come to you, let's say in your masculine leadership training program or some of the intimacy workshops that you do. And as you witness these men, is there something thematically about the pain that they're carrying that you can see?
Yeah. They carry the pain of burden, that it's just, success is a burden and relationship is a burden and life is a burden and, making it all work is a burden. And so the masculine in all of us, especially in men that I see, we're longing for freedom. And like I think I've said to you before, the freedom that we chase as men primarily is the freedom of, I'll be free when I make enough money or when my podcast gets 1 million downloads or when, when I write my book or when I get my Oscar or whatever it is. I'll be free when when my wife loves me fully, surrenders to me fully. And so what I see in men mainly is this chasing for the carrot of freedom. And it's almost always something external. And that is the big lie that we buy into. I'm sure you know lots of successful people, billionaires, who are not fucking happy, who do not feel free, and who then chase them, make their billion and then go chase freedom, right? By going to India for 2 months or something. So it's this chase of freedom that men, including myself, I'm no better. But I've learned now that true freedom comes from the expansion of my consciousness above and beyond. It's the liberation of my consciousness above and beyond what I want, what I think I need, right? That's a practice and a decision and a lifestyle that I've chosen to cultivate and hopefully teach other men. Then, going back to your masculine leadership, the more you cultivate that capacity as a man, the better fucking leader you are. It seems pretty simple, right? Your capacity to rest in the deepest nature of freedom within your heart and within the universe as a daily practice. Can you imagine that you're going to be making better decisions? You're going to be more inspirational and people are going to trust you more. I mean, it's kind of common sense.
Yeah. And I can relate to so much of what you just said, because that freedom for me was freedom from that voice in my head that said, you're not doing enough, you're not living up to your fullest potential. And so inadvertently, I went out and I created all sorts of burden in my life, taking on inordinate amounts of responsibilities and stretching myself too thin, just so that I could come back to this place of this elusive chase of freedom. And then how do we, John, right? Like, how do we balance that need for living up to our fullest potential? Because one of the things that we share on this show often is the definition of hell is on your last day on earth, the man that you became meets the man that you could have become, right? And that's basically you didn't live to your fullest potential. So there's that, but then there's that other thing of like, I don't want burden, I want to feel freedom. How do we get both? Is that, again, going back to consciousness?
Well, somewhat. I mean, the way that I would describe it and the way I give the assignment I give men all the time is, for a short period of time every day, cease striving. Just cease striving. See this couch behind me? You know, people can't see. You see me with this couch? I sit on that couch and I look out over the ocean and I cease striving for a short period of time, 30 minutes, an hour sometimes. And I just allow myself to be with the moment, to be with the richness that life is kind of allowing me to experience. And I allow myself to cease striving. When I do that, if I do that enough, kind of like a daily meditation practice, although it's not like a more traditional meditation practice, it's literally just sitting and doing nothing meticulously. So I cease striving. And then as I move into my day and I start to make decisions, I can revisit that sensation in my body of not striving. So I can do your podcast without striving to make a point, right? Or I can speak to a client, or I can teach a workshop without striving. But first we have to learn what not striving fucking feels like.
Right.
Very few guys, short of drugs and alcohol, really understand, or ayahuasca trip. That's why they're so addictive to men, because for the first time ever, they are not striving. They're feeling the infinite. They're feeling what's possible. They're feeling the great mother. They're feeling everything. And they're like, oh my God, I need more of this. So they go down to Peru or Brazil, for months at a time, and that fucks them up. So ceasing striving for a short period of time, there's more to it, but I think that's the great place for guys to start.
That's great. I know that that's a practice that I implemented years ago when I entered Sex Addicts Anonymous. Was for me, it was a meditative practice, or 7 years ago. A morning breathwork practice was something else that you had given me, right? To deepen into my belly breathing, because most of us breathe into our chests. What are some other examples of practices that you teach men so that we can connect more fully to ourselves in stillness and also to our consciousness?
Well, there's a lot of them, so I'll just give a couple basic concepts. I think the first concept for guys that are new, that haven't done any work, it's really about rooting and breathing into your belly. So there's this idea that you can root, like just now, you and I speaking to each other, you can use the force of your inner body, your spine, to feel the earth more. You can press down through your knees to root, right? You just took 2 seconds and you're more rooted, right? Anybody around you will feel that. And that's a very easy practice to work with. Now, from this rooted place, you can begin to bring more breath down into your lower abdomen, which will bring prana, chi, energy down into your genitals, to your hips. And you can bring more life to this center of power, dantian, they would call it in Qigong. From there, you can then relax your heart. So you can relax your heart, so your heart then can feel from a rooted place the space around you, can feel the terrain of your life, let's call it the landscape of your life, or the landscape of the moment, or the landscape of the relationship, or the landscape of your business. But you getting rooted first, and then bringing breath down into your lower belly, and then relaxing open your heart like a kind of like a sonar, that just feels everything. Those are, if all men did was practice that a few minutes a day, multiple times a day, everything would change for them.
What you talk about, and I also know that Alison Armstrong is someone who you follow and you share some of her work as well, is that
I love Alison.
Men are exceptional at focus and like honing in on just a single focus. What we often miss without practice, and this is what the practice you're talking about, is that expansiveness, right? Like just connecting outside. And I know that I've used your guidance to feel out into the city that I'm in and to feel the bridges and people coming over the bridges and leaving the bridges. And it's fascinating how that shows up when I take a stage or when I show up in front of a room and I can see all of the people in the room, and and it affects how my language is used, because it's like, I may use heterosexual cisgendered language when there may be someone in the room who's not of that orientation. And I never would have pulled that into my practice before, but on a daily basis, that it widens me. And that makes me, I believe, more trustworthy as a masculine leader. And we all, to a man, we all want to be trusted. When we say this is the way it's going to be, or this is where we're going, do we not want everyone to follow us? Yeah. And the way that happens is, at least in my experience, has been through some of these practices that you've shared.
Yeah. And I think you illustrated that beautifully, that the practicing of taking, the one thing I would add to that is that you can take the single-minded focus that you're good at just because evolutionary biology has blessed you as a male to be more single-mindedly focused, right? We all know that. But you can take that single-minded focus, but you can press it wider. It doesn't have to be on a nipple. It could be on the entirety of the stars, right? It could be on the Milky Way, And so men taking their single-minded focus and widening it to the bridges, like you talked about. I'm imagining you're not feeling super stressed when you're doing that practice, are you?
No, I'm not. And what's really funny is the example that you just brought up. I was helping to facilitate a men's retreat a few weeks ago. And a few of the guys were talking about this experience of walking through the city and seeing an amazing ass on a woman, and how it scrambles our circuits, or to use some of your terminology, blowing out our nervous system. And I know that experience well. And what this practice has done is it's taken me from this single focus on ass and my whole circuitry getting scrambled and feeling a desperation to need that and not be able to do anything with it, to then zooming out. And I can see this entire woman and the beauty that she is embodied, and to breathe her in and to say, I can't believe something so beautiful like this exists all around me.
Yeah. I mean, the energy that's emanating, we'll keep using the energy that emanates from her ass is actually much greater than just her physical ass, right? There's an energy, there's the womb in there, there's her hips, there's her sex, there's the depth of what's possible for a feminine being is so much greater than just her ass. And if we pay attention and we use our breath and we relax our heart open and we ground our nervous system, we actually can be with that energy without getting piggish or needy the whole Me Too movement. Men's lack of capacity to be with feminine energy and desire and feel deeper than their kind of piggy nature is the whole essence of Me Too, right? Harvey Weinstein had no idea how to feel deeper than his piggy nature. And so all he did was, just become a little fucking pig. Yeah. And that's something that men can train themselves to do so that they don't make women feel uncomfortable, so that they don't kind of dump that unprocessed need and desire onto women. It's super important.
That's why it's so important that you teach what you teach, because I've been on that side of things, but I also was on the Sex Addicts Anonymous recovery side of things, where anytime I saw an ass that was exciting to me, then it was considered to be reductionary. It was considered to be reducing and objectifying. And so I felt guilt and shame as a result of that, versus being able to actually
celebrate that ass.
Yes. Now I celebrate
that ass. Yeah. Wow. Fucking thank you for that ass.
And thank you for allowing me to celebrate ass again. Okay.
Yeah.
So John, as we roll here to wrapping this up, I'm just fascinated with the work that you do. And over this last year, I've seen how much you are out there spreading the word. I mean, you're ubiquitous in your teachings and on Instagram, which is beautiful. And I'm going to tell our listeners how to follow you. But I'm curious, for the future of your work, where's it going? And what are you most excited about?
Well, one of my deep purposes, legacy purposes, is to help create men's groups that practice the things that we've talked about today. And what I'm trying to refine, I mean, I have a program that I teach every year, and we do retreats and we do things online, and I love it. It's great. I love it. But my reach is probably going to go online, where I give some kind of training for men on how to set up embodied men's circles.
Awesome.
And the very, some of the practices that we're talking about, like sharing those practices and giving men a way to do that. Because, my intention starting my men's program a few years ago was to create 10,000 men's groups around the world, help support that. So I'll probably have to go online. I also have 2 books that I'm writing this year and finishing up. So, I'm not stopping, hopefully for a while. But it's all going to come out. Yeah.
I believe I saw that you had some wall art in your home that had something around the 10,000 men's groups. Now I know what you're talking about. Okay.
Right.
That's awesome.
Right. It was one of the original thing when I really felt like, what is my deepest desire for this? It's to help create thousands of men's groups around the world that men can recreate and emulate and really deepen, so they can have the experience that I got to have.
Awesome. So I'm going to give all the links to your socials for everyone who's listening. You have to follow John on Instagram and YouTube. His content comes out regularly in these beautiful bite-sized chunks that can really give you a flavor for the work. And then there's some longer form teachings that he has online as well. And John, I know that one of the things I'm most excited about this year is that I'm going to have a chance to come to see you in April, you and your teacher, David Deida, in Boone, North Carolina. So what are the dates for those for anyone who may be interested?
Shit, I don't know. It's the first couple weeks of April. You can go on my website, johnwineland.com or daviddeida.info, and get the dates. But I'm pretty sure there's 2 workshops. One's a larger 3-day workshop, and then the other is a smaller 5-day intensive, which is very, very deep practice. And really, I'm just there to support David. David's teaching these things, and I'll be around, and I might more than likely teach the men's side of it, the men's practice side of it. But this is David's workshop, and it's just an opportunity for me to support my teacher this guy's given me so much and taught me so much. So it's my honor to do that.
Awesome. So I'll link that in the show notes, johnwineland.com. John, thank you for your grace, for your wisdom, and the work you're doing in the world.
Thank you, Dominic. Yeah, great to be with you, man.
Hey, Brian and I wanted to thank you for the ratings and reviews that you leave us. We read every single one of them, and they're so helpful in helping us to understand what resonates with you and helps us determine which topics that we use in the future. So if you found this episode to be of particular value to you, will you please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts so that we know that this is the kind of topic you want to hear more about? And it also helps other prospective listeners to figure out where they can dive in first. Thank you.